One-step inequalities. Write down this inequality and solve it as if it were an equation. So what you're going to do to isolate your x is subtract 4 or add 4 negatives to both sides. So we are left with x as a value less than negative 2. So when we go and we substitute, let me rewrite the equation. If we substitute in any value that's less than negative 2 for x, then we should get a true statement. If we actually substitute in negative 2, we end up with 2 is less than 2, and that's not true. Because remember, our inequality is just less than, not less than or equal to. So you'll choose a value that's less than negative 2. So instead of x, I'm going to say maybe negative 3. And negative 3 plus 4 is less than 2. Negative 3 and 4 is 1, and 1 is less than 2. That is a true statement. So any value that is less than 2 will work for x. Now write down this inequality and solve it as if it were an equation. So what you're going to do is divide both sides by 5, and you get that x is greater than or equal to negative 2. So we're going to substitute values in. Let's say that because our statement says x is less than or equal to negative 2, so what if we put in negative 2? What would happen? We would end up with negative 10 is less than or equal to negative 10, which is a true statement. So we know that x can equal to negative 2. Now let's choose a number that is greater than negative 2. Let's just go with negative 1. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5, and negative 5 is greater than negative 10. Think about it on a number line. Okay, now I want you to solve this equation as if it were, solve this inequality as if it were an equation. So what you're going to do is divide both sides by negative 2, and you get x is less than negative 3. Now let's rewrite that. Now we know that x cannot equal negative 3, but we do think that x can be any value less than 3. So let's choose a value that's less than 3, like negative 3. Let's say maybe negative 4. Negative 2 times negative 4 is less than 6. Negative 2 times negative 4 is 8. And is 8 less than 6? No, that's not a true statement. So we know that this is not true for x. X cannot be any value less than negative 3. So the rule is when you are dividing by negatives or when you are multiplying by negatives, you have to flip your inequality sign. So we're actually going to flip it, and we're going to say that x has to be any value greater than negative 3. Now let's test that. So let's try negative 2. What is a value that is greater than negative 3? What about negative 1? I can put in any value. So negative 2 times negative 1 is 2, which is less than 6. So we flipped our sign, our inequality sign, and we have a true statement. Now I want you to write this equation down, this inequality down, and I want you to solve it. But I put the little note over here. Remember, when you are multiplying or dividing by a negative, you have to flip the inequality sign. Okay, so let's solve this. There are a couple of ways that you can do it. So we have negative x over 6 is greater than or equal to 2. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 6. and I'm left with negative x is greater than or equal to 12. So now remember that when you have negative x, that's really just negative 1x. So to get rid of that negative, what we're really doing is dividing by a negative 1. And because a negative divided by a negative is a positive, so we're left with x is greater than negative 12. But remember what we did. We divided by a negative, so we have to flip our inequality symbol. So x has to have a value less than or equal to negative 12. Now let's rewrite the equation. And our original equation was negative x over 6 is less than or equal to 2. So let's substitute in a value that is less than or equal to negative 12. So let's go with 18 because I know it's divisible by 6. So we're going to go with negative 18, sorry. So negative, and then we're going to substitute in negative 18 for x divided by 6 is greater than or equal to 2. So negative, so really what's happening here is you have negative, and then negative 18 divided by 6 is negative 3 is greater than or equal to 2. And negative, this is basically negative 1 times negative 3. So that's 3 is less than, is greater than or equal to 2. And that is a true statement. So yes, x was less than or equal to 12. So very important. These are so similar to regular equations. Your one little trick is when multiplying or dividing by a negative, you have to flip the inequality sign.